And good morning, everybody. Welcome back to class. This is Chris coming at you from Willow Springs this morning at 9 a.m. We're talking about the exam number 3 today, covering chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. Hope everybody's doing well. I see we have about a half a dozen people in the live audience. Andrea, Melody, Sarah, Amani, good to see you. How are you doing this morning? Hope everybody is ready for a windy day. It's supposed to be very windy out there with gusts up to 30 miles. So make sure you keep all your stuff in your pockets today. Hello, Claudia. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. Just getting ready to talk about the exam today. Hope everybody's got some time for fun this weekend. Hopefully something good's going on in your weekend. All right. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Uh, I'm just glad it's rained and washed away some of the pollen. Yeah, good point, Andrea. I should have put my porch furniture outside in the rain so it could get rained on. I missed that one. I've had the stuffy nose and the headaches that last this week too. So I don't know if any of you have allergies, but the allergies usually get me every year. This pollen gums me up. Let's go ahead and take a look at this week's exam. I'm going to go to the whiteboard real quick. You see my coffee cup here. We've got exam 3 covers chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. There are 50 questions, 60 minutes. And you'll see we have 13 questions for chapter 9, 13 questions for chapter 10, 12 questions for chapter 11, and 12 questions for chapter 12. It's a combination of multiple choice, matching, and ordering questions, and I think I have two short answers on this exam. All right, so it's going to be the standard format that we usually see in a regular exam. Anybody have any questions about that, the exam format? Okay, if you don't, let's go ahead and start talking about the exams, shall we? Go ahead and flip this over, and we'll go to chapter 12, 13 questions. Okay, let's see. Two questions on emotions in general, defining them and their qualities. Okay, so the emotional wheel and the fact that emotions have energy and positivity. Let's see. That's the general emotions questions. Let's see. The biology of hunger. So brain areas. Okay, question there. Let's see. Let's see. Maslow's hierarchy. One question. Okay, then let's see. Those one question on classic theories of emotion. And this is James Lang versus the Canon Bard. So there's one question there on emotions. One question on, let's say 2 biology questions, brain areas and hormones. Okay, so 2 questions there. Let's see. One question on emotions and culture. So I talked about how some cultures differ in when it's proper to express emotions. Let's see. Up. I take that back. James versus Canabard versus there is a Shachter, and there are two questions about that. Two questions. Let's see. You know what? I guess you could really put three biology questions. Three biology questions. You know what? Four biology questions. Okay. Two general questions. Questions on theories of motivation. So if you'll go back into your PowerPoint presentations, I had a chart where I talked about the different theories of motivation, optimal arousal, drive theory, psychodynamic theories of motivation. So I had a couple of general questions on that. And let's see, one other questions on micro expressions of emotion. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, 13 questions. Excuse me, chapter 9. I'm sorry, Andrea and Nicole caught me. Yes, it's chapter 9. I'm starting backwards. Okay, does everybody see that? Do we have any questions on chapter 9? Any questions on chapter 9? If you would, go ahead and let me know. I'll wait just a second here. Okay. Okay, I'm waiting. Doesn't seem like it. Okay, let's go on to chapter 10. Chapter 10, which also has 13 questions. Slide that up just a little bit. Okay, everybody sees that? Okay, fantastic. All right, let's see. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, 5 questions on the biology of sex. And so that's stuff like primary versus secondary characteristics, genes, hormones, and anatomy. Okay, so I've got 5 questions on the biology of sex. One, well, let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Wow. 6. Let's see. You know, let's go with 6 questions. And let's see, non-normative conditions. So remember we talked about the hormone, we talked about the genetic and chromosomal anomalies. So some people can be XXY, some people can be X no Y, XYY, for example, or XXY. Does that make sense? Hi, Trinity. Thanks for coming. We're talking about chapter 10. I've got 6 questions on the biology of sex. So what primary versus secondary sex characteristics are, what genes are related to the determination of sex, the hormones that are related to sex, different body parts related to sex, and non-normative conditions. So I've got sort of 5 different topics and 6 questions on the biology of sex. One, two questions on gender socialization. Okay. And then let's see. One. You know what? I'm going to go with 7 questions on biology. 2 on gender, and then 2 on, and and the rest, honestly, and 6 on gender socialization. Okay. So gender socialization and labeling. And I hate to use the word labeling, but we talked about transsexual, we talked about cisgender, we talked about homo versus hetero versus bi. We talked about those. So we've got sort of 6 questions on labeling and gender socialization and 7 questions on the biology of sex. Does that make sense? If I could get a little feedback in the chat bar and let me know that you understand what I'm talking about. That was enough detail. Really, you can put all the questions into that label of sort of gender socialization, how we teach gender, and also how people's sense of gender sometimes doesn't uh, equate with their physiological sex, right? So we kind of talked about those 2 things in context. I hope that makes sense. Any questions? Any questions? So orientation and socialization. Right, right. And so there are like 2 or 3 questions on labeling, 3 questions on labeling, and 3 questions on gender socialization. So you can kind of put all those together. So I've got 6 questions that cover all aspects of biology, what primary versus secondary characteristics were, what hormones, what genes. Actually, specifically, you need to know the gene. You need to know the hormones associated with male and female. It's pretty basic stuff. The difference between primary and secondary sex characteristics, and there's 1 or 2 questions on the 1 question on the chromosomal variations that lead to non-normative sexes, and chemical developmental, or what you might call epigenetic change that doesn't occur during the developmental process that leads to a non-normative uh, uh, biological sex orientation. I hope that makes sense. Sometimes I talk and I lose myself. So basically, yeah, biological questions, and then the other are going to be about how we learn gender and how we label people. And I'm not sure why it's important that we label people, other than to identify that they exist. Maybe sometimes I feel almost when you're labeling people, you're creating stereotypes about them. So I feel weird doing that. But your book finds it valuable to to label different sexual orientations and different gender orientations. And so I want you to know those, if you will. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, chapter 11, 12 questions. Okay, let's see what we have here. Go back to the whiteboard. 12 questions. Okay. So does everybody see the whiteboard here? Okay, perfect. All right, so question, this is chapter 11, all right, where we were talking about stress and stress and coping. Okay, so there's one. Uh-oh. Okay. One, two, three. Okay, so there's one question about the general causes of stress, and that was slide 1, week 11. Okay. Then there are 2 questions about the general adaptation syndrome, Hans Steely's general abstat. Oh, you know what? And 2, general causes of stress and the type of psychologist in this field. And you can find those on slide 1. Slide 1. 2 questions about the general adaptation syndrome. Let's see. One, stress hormones. Hormones related to stress. Let's see. You know what? Let's say 2 on stress hormones and genetics. Okay, so we've got 6 questions right there. 1, 2, 2 questions about daily hassles versus major life stressors. Okay, there are 2 questions like that. 1, 2, 3. And 4 questions on factors that affect the experience of stress. Things like primary versus secondary appraisal, marriage, uh, uh, factors that sickness when stressed. Okay. And then one question on problem versus problem focused versus emotion focused coping, which is a factor that sort of affects stress. So we've got 8, 10, 11, 12. I've got too many questions here. You know what? It might only be 3 factors, excuse me. And then this is the one. Okay, so we've got 4 questions, 6, 8, 10, 12. Yeah, there we go. Good old cortisol. Thank you, Melody. Yes, absolutely. Good old cortisol. We love cortisol. Fantastic. Okay, any questions about chapter 11? Any questions about chapter 11? So 2 from the first slide. What exactly, what are the causes of stress? You know, what the general model, which talks about all the factors that go into deciding whether or not you're stressed, your culture, your psychology, and your coping mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. And then we talked about the kind of psychologist that you're going to find helping people deal with different levels of stress. So that's sort of the first slide from chapter 11. Then I've got a couple of questions about the general adaptation syndrome. that process of dealing with stressors that our body goes through. Then I've got a couple of questions about the biology of stress. Then I want you to know the difference between daily hassles and major life stressors. Then I want you to know I've got 4 different questions about the factors that are related to the experience of stress. Does it make you more or less sick? How? What causes, what effect does being married have on your level of stress? What about your ability to make prime versus secondary appraisals of stress? And when is it appropriate to use emotion-based coping versus problem-based coping? So those are the questions from chapter 11 that I want you to know. Okay, switch over, go back to the whiteboard. And we are now at chapter 12, 12 questions. Here we are, Andre and Nicole. Now I'm finally back to chapter 12 like I initially thought I was starting on, right? Crazy is that. Okay, let's see. One. Okay, so one. Let's see. Okay, so okay, so there's a general question about social psych. What is social psych? Uh, what is a social psychologist? One question. 2 questions on attributions. Remember, we talked about personal versus situational. I want you to know that. Okay, let's see. That's 1, 2. There's two questions on the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion. There's 2 questions on that. All right. And then let's see. Okay, there's a question on bystander apathy. One, two, two questions on informational versus normative influences. And let's see, 1, 2, informational influence, line judging studies. Yeah. And with these, we're talking about the famous studies. Milgram and Ash. Okay, if you remember those, the line judging study and the shock study. So I got 2 questions about those. Okay, let's see. 1, 2. Okay, and then let's see. 1 question on 6 stereotypes. And 1 question on studying prejudice, discrimination, and stereotypes. I want you to be, I have definitions, so you're going to match with their definitions. It's a simple matching question here. And then one on World War II and social psychology. Remember, social psychology was very important in World War II. 11, let's see. One, two. Oh, you know what? There are probably three questions here. Three questions here. 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yep, there you go. Good morning, dear Erica. How are you doing? Cosette, good to see you as well. We've just finished. So, those are the 12 questions I have for chapter 12. Okay. So that's really all I have to share. Does anyone have any questions about the exam? I'm noticing there aren't a lot of chats in the chat bar. Either that means you're not engaged or you completely have this and the review is so perfect that you don't have any questions. It's usually not the last one and it's more of the first one. So good morning. I was driving, got to get stuff prepped to drive to Florida. Yay! Well, be careful. Just writing. Okay. Did all of that make sense? Did that help at all? Drives. Good morning, Amin. So we just finished up the review. If you just got here, the three theories of emotion. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I send a photo of the review. No, actually, I sent the link to the review, Anna. I don't want to send too many remind messages. I already think I blow your phone up too much, so I'm afraid to send any more pictures. Um, but if you go to the review session on link, you can scroll back and forth to the pictures as you want them. Okay, let's see. Could you go over the three theories of emotion? Right, 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 right. Okay, so if you remember the three classic theories of emotion, and they asked the question, how do the physical experience and the cognitive experience relate to emotions? Okay, so and the idea here is that we all know whenever you are scared, our body reacts a certain way. Our body reacts a certain way. Our heart starts beating fast. Our breathing speeds up. We start sweating. Our eyes get big. We all know we have a physiological response to fear. And we also all know that when we're scared, we think scared thoughts. Oh my God, that's a bear. It's going to kill me. It's going to eat me. Oh my God, etc., etc., etc. So, what's going on in my head? And so, early researchers in the 18th century, in the 19th century, began to hypothesize about how emotions and beliefs about emotions work together. Now, this was long before we knew about the spot in the brain called the amygdala and its relationship to emotions. We didn't understand the effect that frontal lobes had on emotions. And if you think about it, the amygdala is that part of your brain that causes the physiological response, and your frontal lobe is that part of your brain that causes you to think scary thoughts or not think scary thoughts. Now, the cool thing about these theories is these people didn't understand these biological links, and yet their theory of what an emotion was related to these two kinds of experiences that people feel. Okay, but so how do they work? So there was what we called the William James came up with a theory called the James Lang, him and a fellow named Lang, I forget the guy's first name, model of emotion. Okay? And their idea was we have a stimulus, let's say a bear, okay? It causes a physiological response, that is, your heart starts beating. Oh, excuse me. Your heart starts beating. So, three classic theories of emotions. How do the physical experience and the cognitive experience relate to emotions? And so this was the question these fellows were asking. The first one was the James Lang model of emotion. And they said we have the stimulus, the scary event, and that causes a physiological response. Your heart starts beating fast. And then he argued that because of this, you then decide, I am afraid, which is the belief or the cognition. So we have the physiological response, and then cognition comes later. Okay? So in a sense. Now, if you remember, we talked about this in your book. There's an experiment called the facial feedback hypothesis. Ah, I don't know if you folks remember this. You can look in your book. Okay? Look in your book. Now, the idea with the facial feedback hypothesis was that if you make people turn their body into a certain emotion, that will affect the way they think. So this is where they do the experiment, and they have people read comic strips, funny comic strips, and they have them put a pencil either here, which is a smile, or here, which is a frown. And what they find is that people who read the comic with the pencil here find the comic strips to be far more funny than the people who read the comic strips like that. And the idea is that your body creates an emotion, and then that causes your brain to have the experience of that emotion. And that's the James Long theory of emotion. Now we can contrast that with what's known as the Cannon Bard theory. And what they argued was that you have the stimulus, which is the bear, and what they argued was that we have the cognition and the physiological response at the same time. So I am scared and my heart is beating. Now, honestly, these guys, this theory is probably closer to the truth in that we have these physiological responses. Now, in a sense, both of these start together. However, I would argue that you know what? Actually, let's wait till we get to the end. So this is a second theory, and it says that the cognition uh, can sort of in the physiology of being scared come at the same time. All right, that's sort of the second theory. Now, the third theory is posited by a fellow named Stanley Schachter, and he argues that emotions that physical emotions are vague. We use social cues to interpret our emotions. Okay? And so what he did was he gave people adrenaline, right? Without telling them. Didn't tell them. I'm simplifying this experiment. Didn't tell them. Okay. And then he exposed them to a happy model, somebody in the room who was acting happy, or an angry model. And the persons and the final emotion depended on the model. Okay? If the model was happy, the person felt the arousal and said, you know what, I'm aroused, I must be happy too. The person felt the arousal, and if they saw an angry model, they said, you know what, I'm probably angry too. So, in a sense, Stanley Schachter said that the cognition and the physiology are actually completely independent. Instead, we interpret our physiology based upon the situation. Now, here's the crazy thing about emotions. Here's the crazy thing what we know about emotions now. Here's what I would say. Uh, uh, James was right because physiology happens quicker than cognition. So, in a sense, he was right. The physiology occurs first. However, I would say that Walter Cannon, was right in that we process cognitively and physiology at same time, right? So although this one is faster, they occur at the same time. And you know what? Schachter was right because you can change your emotional experience based on how you interpret your world. Okay? So, in a sense, they're all right when it comes to these theory of emotions. So, basically, the old classic theories wanted to know how did cognition and physiology go along. And they tried to draw these theories which said happens first, this happens second, and it's a unilinear direction. So James said that we have our body responds physiologically, we interpret that and create an emotion. Cannon said no, they happen at the same time and they are always in agreement. Schachter said no, we have physiological responses, they occur first, and then we look to our environment to interpret them. Well, all of these are right, in that now we do know that we have two paths to emotion. We have the amygdala, and that it's fast emotions. And we have a second path that goes from our frontal lobe to amygdala, which is the slow emotions. Okay? And so we know that when things come from our thalamus, okay, so when sensory information comes into our thalamus, okay, it goes to the amygdala and creates a body response. This is the fast path. But then there's another one that goes through our frontal lobe that then goes to our amygdala. And this is what we would call the slow path. Okay, so you can think of the frontal lobe and the amygdala as representing sort of the fast and the slow path of emotion. You can represent the frontal lobe as that part of your brain that controls the way you think and interpret events. And we use this model, although we talked about this in emotion, we actually use this model when we talked about the stress response. Okay, something comes in and it lights up your amygdala. Your son comes in and tells you that your teenage son comes in and tells you that he's wrecked his new car. I had to deal with this. My first emotional response, my amygdala got really, really angry. However, I've had to learn as a parent to redefine what is stressful to me. So I thought about it and I said, you know what, it's just a problem, it's just money, we can overcome this. And so I used my frontal lobe to control my emotional response because stress is nothing but an emotional response. Yes, it's the stimulus and the stressor, but it's how you choose to interpret that. And we can think of that as the slow path to emotion. And just like little kids have to learn how to use their frontal lobes not to cry all the time, adults have to use their frontal lobe to understand how to interpret events so that they don't have emotionally stressful experiences when the world inevitably goes wrong. My God, that was a long description for a very short question. Uh, 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 um, Melody. Was that the question you were asking, Brian? You were actually asking about stress. Okay. The factors that affect stress. Being married decreases your level of stress. Uh, um, uh, Being spiritual decreases your level of stress. Having a sense of, of meaning decreases your level of stress. Those are three sort of environmental factors that we can look at. Demographic factors. Are you married? Probably going to experience less stress. Do you go to church? Probably going to experience less stress. Do you get up in every day and have a sense of meaning, or is life meaningless? You're going to have less stress. Those are the general factors. But then we can talk about personal factors. And some people, when a stressful event comes in, I talked about Lazarus's model. In order to experience stress, you have to say, yes, that is a stressful event. That is a challenging event that's going to cause me to have to make a change. But then it's the secondary appraisal. Do I have the resources to make the change? And what Lazarus argued was that second part is where we differentiate who experiences stress and who doesn't. We all have an exam coming up, and that exam represents a challenge to each and every one of you. So all of us are making the primary appraisal. Oh my God, I have an exam coming up. What differentiates those of you who find the exam stressful and those of you who don't is those of you who don't then make a secondary appraisal where you say, you know what, I can pass this test. It's not going to be that difficult. On the other hand, some of you, your secondary appraisal is going to be, oh my God, this is added on to all the other stuff I possibly do. There's no way I can meet this challenge. You are going to have the experience of stress. Oh, the man with many names. Right, right. Okay. I thought I started out on a long explanation of that. Okay, Brian, where is the man of many names? Suddenly, oh, there you go. There you are. Okay, cool. All right. So, Brian, did that help you? If you would, let me know. I'm going to take a sip of coffee and think about that. All right. I just want to make sure that I'm answering questions that people ask. So we can think about your qualities. And Brian, you were talking about it last night in class. A sense of spirituality certainly helps. If you've got, because you're around a bunch of people, and we talked about having human connections, being married, having a group of people as being protective of stress. But then, people who are in those situations and have those kind of support factors, they tend to respond differently to challenge. So, um, This is why some people suffer from stress and anxiety, even though their life is not that bad. You know, you look at a rock star and you say, how could you possibly be stressed? People love you, you have all the money in the world, you get to do exciting things, but you don't know how that person sees those events. So, two people can have the same existence, but one of them tends to interpret their world differently. And again, this goes back to the idea of emotions having a cognitive component and having a physiological component. And what we talk about in terms of child development, why do 1 year olds and 2 year olds and 3 year olds cry all of the time? And why don't 18 year olds and 25 year olds cry when they skin their knee and get a boo boo? And it just depends on how you learn to control the emotional response that is generated by these triggers in your environment. You know, somebody does me wrong at work. You know, I remember, I remember when I was first grade, I was drawing this, we were doing these posters for Fire Prevention Day, and I drew the coolest poster ever. And the teacher was really complimenting me, and I was so proud. And then I looked over and I noticed that a girl behind me was seeing what I was drawing, and so she started drawing the same thing. And I remember it made me so mad that I started crying in class because this little girl was copying me, right? I hadn't learned to control that emotional response. Now, as a 50-year-old, I of course would not cry if I saw the girl behind me copying my lecture. Uh, I might crash her computer, but I wouldn't cry. You know what I mean? And so the weird thing, what the lesson that I tried to convey in emotions and then later in the stress chapter is that stress is just an emotional response. And by understanding how emotions work, they have this physiological component, but then you have this cognitive pathway that comes a little slower that can moderate the initial emotion. What I would suggest to you is that learning how to deal with stress and not have the negative emotional response is simply learning how to use cognitive strategies. Remember, I talked about uh, 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 the the uh, to the ABCDE model of stress reduction. Most of us respond to initial negative events with a emotional belief that causes us to have a physiological consequence. The key to avoiding stress is learning how to reframe and refocus the events that occur in your life. Um, you know what I mean? When your car breaks down, instead of saying, here we go again, you would say stuff, you know what, at least I have friends that can help me get around while my car is broken down. I buy POS cars. I don't have new cars. I buy the cheapest car I possibly can. In fact, right now I've got it's a 98 Honda. It's like 25 years old. I bought it for 1,200 bucks. You know what? About every 3 or 4 months, I'm on the side of the road. Now, I could say, damn it, my car broke down again. But what I usually say is, hey, I don't have a car payment. So what does it matter if I break down occasionally? It's not the event, it's how you interpret the event. And emotions and stress, if you put the knowledge from both of those chapters together, hopefully you can learn the strategies that will help you to lead a life free of the negative effects of stress. Oh my God, that was boring. I'm boring myself. Did that make sense? Did that improve your life? Okay, folks, any questions? Let's wrap this bad boy up. Uh, if you don't have any questions, type no questions in the chat bar or something like thanks a bunch or just something wrapping the class up. If you do have a question, feel free to type it in there and I will answer that question. I'm here as long as you need me. But that's all I have to say. No questions. I mean, thank you very much. I mean, awesome. Can you talk about the elaborative likelihood? Okay, no more questions. Have a great weekend. No questions. We appreciate you. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, Brian, real quickly, and those of you who want to bug off can, but for the elaboration likelihood model, the idea is we know that there are really simple things that affect how persuasive we find a message, right? So if somebody comes and tries to sell you something and they look professional and they sound professional and they drive a fancy car, a lot of times we find these people persuasive. That's not very thoughtful, but yet it works, right? We use attractive models to sell products. We use famous models to sell products. In fact, I was telling you that I buy Hanes underwear because Michael Jordan sold Hanes underwear. Do I really care about Hanes underwear? No, but Michael Jordan wears them, so I find that message persuasive. So sometimes we hold attitudes for very silly, superficial reasons. On the other hand, sometimes when we're forming our attitudes, we really think deeply and try to be convinced or not convinced by the thoughtful points that people provide for their persuasive messages. And so the question is, when does the suit matter, the superficial stuff matter, and when does the meat of the message matter? Okay, and what we suggested is that when people are not, when the message is too complex for them, or when the outcomes really don't affect them personally, people tend to gravitate towards peripheral cues. Okay, so if you're trying to explain to me why I should use the latest chemical compound in my diet and I don't really understand the science, what I'm going to do is look at you and say, well, he or she is a very attractive person. So if they use this stuff, I'll use this stuff. That's what we would call peripheral processing of a persuasive message. On the other hand, if you're talking to me about a psychological textbook I should use, okay, and my school is deciding whether or not we are going to adopt this for my class, okay, I am both able, because this is my area of expertise, and also I'm going to have to use this next year, so this decision really affects me. Uh, I'm not going to care whether or not you wear a nice suit or you're attractive. Instead, I'm going to listen to the arguments that you have in support of your textbook, and I'm going to process the persuasive message through what we call the central route to persuasion. Okay, and so basically, this model just asks the question, when you're designing persuasive messages, when should you focus on the content of the message, and when is it important to have the peripheral things around the edge to convince the person? Uh, I don't know. Oh, I'm Sarah. I hope you're still here. I'm sorry we're going to miss you at lecture next week. Um, Exactly. It would depend upon, and right, and you're going to ask yourself, should we spend that extra money to get that beautiful star? Well, it depends on what you're trying to sell. If you're trying to sell something that is really important to people, maybe not. You know, when I'm looking for a computer, I don't really give a crap whether Reese Witherspoon or Dave Grohl uses that computer. Instead, I need that computer to work for me. So if you're selling something that really has a difference, you don't necessarily need that star power. However, if you're selling something that doesn't matter, like your brand of potato chips, your brand of socks, your brand of soap or detergent, you know what? You need to use a pretty model because there's really no differences in the product. So instead, you want to try to take me through the peripheral route to persuasion. Cool. I hope you can make it to webinar. I'm good deal. Hope you have fun out of town, Sarah, but we will miss you in lecture because I do appreciate you coming to lecture and giving comments. That's always very nice and helpful. I do appreciate that. Um, but we will see you in webinar. Ooh, next week is personality chapter. We're going to take the big 5 personality tests. We're going to talk about what our personality scores mean. And then we're going to, I have another one that I want you to take in class, known as a thematic apperception test. So we're going to have fun in webinar next week. I hope you're there, Sarah. Let's see. You're right, Brian. Okay. Cool. All right, folks, I am done. Have a great day. It is 9:52. I'm now going to hit the gym and get my cardio on and lift some old man weights because remember I told you in the health psychology chapter that exercising, getting regular exercise is good for your mind. It'll protect you from dementia. So I don't just talk this talk, I definitely walk this walk. So I'm going to the gym down there, Planet Fitness down there in Garner, and I'm going to do a pathetic old man workout. You should too. Have a great day, folks, okay? Take care, and I will see you next Tuesday.